I don't know where it was where, I was giving a talk and someone said, well, you come and say all of these things, but look at you talking to us in English. It's a valid question and a valid point. But here is my response to it. I speak isiZulu, I speak isiXhosa, isiMpondo, isiSuthu. But if ndithethe isiMpondo apha bangapha abantu abazawundiva. So then I wouldn't have communicated. Or if I spoke in isiXhosa bangapha abantu abazawundiva, maybe a little more, but abaninzi abazondiva. Here is what we are struggling for. This struggle is not an individual act. We are not struggling for, a performance by Lwazi Lushaba who's able to speak, and say these things in isiXhosa or in isiZulu. What we are struggling for is the structural change of society, such that people go through education that enables them to speak, in their own languages. So what we're struggling for is a certain fundamental change in society such that the structure of society itself enables that kind of communication, enables us to be able to converse in isiXhosa or in isiTswana, because what you have at present moment is a structure of society that actually makes it impossible, for us to do that. So what it's going to end up being is going to end up being an individual capability. So if I'm able to do it in isiXhosa or in, isiMpondo, it then becomes just an individual capability. Rather, what we need is a certain structural design of society where people actually study, and are able to articulate themselves in these languages. In more explicit terms, if you went to France, there is no possibility of you studying in France without learning French. But you come to South Africa, where we constitute 86% of the population, it's possible to actually not speak any of the languages of the people who constitute 86% of the population. Now, it is a structural design of society. In fact, it's possible for a black person in South Africa to say that isiXhosa has no use, I have no use for the language, and I don't need to learn it or to speak it. Now, what needs to change is that it's not my individual capability that will become an individual performance. I do not see, why it is that you are going to call yourself, for instance, a lecturer in South Africa at the Western Cape, where isiXhosa is the, language of, the indigenous population here. You teach here, but you can't teach in isiXhosa or you can't speak isiXhosa. So until, we get to that point where we make it not compulsory, we make it part of society. We make it an integral part, of people's development and intellectual development and cultural development, that they speak, in their own languages. Then it will become possible to produce knowledge in those languages. In China, you are able to study medicine in Chinese, isn't it? It's not magical, it's not magic, You can also study medicine in isiZulu. It's not magic. All that has happened is that these languages have not been given an opportunity structurally to develop, to follow the development of society. So as a result, they lag behind. So people would quickly say that, but the vocabulary is not there. A language develops a vocabulary. We create new words every time. Ingculazi is a word created that we created just a few years ago. We did not have a name for HIV and AIDS because it did not exist. We had to create it when it came into existence. Similarly, a language would be able to create the necessary vocabulary. It is all that has happened here, unlike in Germany, where Germany has been allowed to develop a technical vocabulary and a scientific vocabulary. What hasn't happened here is it has happened in China, even in India. In India, you are able to study medicine in Indian languages, not in one India, in different Indian languages, because the structure of society is such that your education is provided in a mother tongue, language, and therefore, over time, you are able to develop, the knowledge in the universities or codify knowledge in the universities. using, mother tongue or mother languages. So it is not something, it is not magical. There was a time when, in China, Chinese did not have the vocabulary for modern science, but they now do because they set on developing that vocabulary. There was a time in India when Bengali could not be the language of science, but now it is. You can study nuclear physics in Bengali because simply society decided to engage in that kind of a project. It is that we are struggling for. So all I want to see is a kind of society where people are able to inculcate their intellectual capabilities using their languages. I'm not looking for an individual performance. It doesn't help me to go and sit as Lwazi Lushaba and be able to do it. And as much as I'm able to do it, but it doesn't help me. It would not change society. What needs to change is the entirety of society, not just my individual capability. So you're quite correct in saying that, maybe asizuba luncedo thina ngoku, but I think that, it behooves on us, those who are self-respecting black people, to ensure that we engage in a struggle that would lead, because this is not attainable in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. This is a long-term project, that would be achieved when we are long gone. 50 years down the line, in fact, linguists tell us that to develop a language to that extent that it would be able to, you would require a minimum of 50 years, to develop that vocabulary. So it means that every year we lose with our languages not being taught, at school, we are postponing, that realization. We are adding to the 50 years that is a standard, requirement in terms of time to be able to develop a language to that level. So what needs to change, what needs to happen is change at a structural level of society, not just at an individual level. And I think in that way, we would be able to attend to both your concerns, as to whether we can be able to get out of this. Now, I think the point that does need to be made about culture. Again here, the struggle, to decolonize society is not a search for a traditional Africa. It's not a search for a pre-colonial traditional Africa that is virgin of any foreign intrusion. No. The struggle to decolonize society is to recreate society today. We're not looking for a pure virgin pre-colonial Africa, that has not had any encounter, with the rest of the world. What we want to do is to recreate, the world today. And the reality of the world today is, that we have moved away from that pre-colonial past. And therefore, we're not searching for those origins. Culture is what you create in order to cope with the environment. Now, the unfortunate thing for us is that we have had to create our culture now, under conditions that are dictated to us, where we become objects, of a certain sociological schema. So even at moments when we think, we're being creative culturally, we're being creative as objects, of a certain sociological schema, So whatever we do, there is a certain aesthetic, respectability means that you must dress in a certain way. So if you dress in a certain way, that's when, the sociological schema says that that's when, society will look at you as a respectable person. And then the culture says that, you must appear respectable. And then there is this sociological schema that says to you, this is the only way in which you appear respectable, because you are that object, you experience your body as an object. And therefore you go through. So we are creating our culture under conditions, that are, or that have already turned us, into objects. As you said, we've been turned into things. The thingification of black people is what has, befallen us. Are we meeting next week? It's exams.